Hi everybody, my name's Chris, and in this short video, well, maybe it'll be a short video, I want to show you how to make a simple animation like you see running on the screen right here. I've got a very simple animation, and it's counting the bounces as the little square bounces off the edges of the screen. My real purpose in this project is to actually introduce a JavaScript game engine, a very simple one. This little program is written entirely in JavaScript, what I call vanilla JavaScript, with no libraries added, just plain old JavaScript. Okay, and in my opinion, for beginner programmers, that's the best way to learn. Keep it simple and learn JavaScript. And I'm a high school teacher. I've got 16 years teaching high school kids how to program, and this is what I teach them. And I tell them, once you learn how to write JavaScript, plain JavaScript, and learn how to make a game engine, like I'm going to show you here, you can make any game, within reason, And so this is the key to unlocking that and being able to do that. So let's get started. Okay, so here you see before you in the brackets editor, I have the entire game or program that I was just showing you, about 110 lines of code. Not that difficult, might sound like a lot to you, but it's really not that much. And so we're going to get started here in brackets. I'm going to go File, New, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Got a little folder here on my desktop. Well, I'll just call it Game Engine, since that's what we're making. And in this plain document, I want to get my HTML file started. So I have an extension built in here in brackets that will allow me to come in and just quickly add a basic HTML skeleton. You have to add the extension to be able to do that. But here we go. We've got our plain HTML document. I'm going to go ahead and add a title here, Game Engine. Okay, we're ready to get going. In this program, we're going to need in the HTML, not much, but we are going to need the canvas element. So in the body tag, I'm going to go ahead and add a canvas element. And the only thing I need to give it as far as an attribute is an ID, and we're going to call it my canvas. This is basically giving the canvas a name. And on that, you will use that name a little bit later, as you'll see in the JavaScript. In addition to the canvas, I also want to add a little bit of CSS, and that's just going to help make our page look a little bit better. So up here in the head area, I'm going to add some styles. So here's my style tag, and in there, I just want to simply add a body tag. We're just going to set the margins to 0, the padding to 0, and the overflow to hidden. Really all that does is make our canvas fill up the whole window in the browser. So it looks good. All right, now let's go ahead down after our canvas tag. It's still in the body element of the page, and let's add our script tag. As we know, the script tag is where all of our JavaScript will go, has to go inside there. And so everything else we're going to do in this program is going to go inside the script tag. The very first things that we want to do here with our scripts is add our variables for the canvas. I like to add a variable, call it canvas, and simply say document.getElementById. As I stated earlier, I gave it the name my canvas, and so we need to now refer to that ID name, and by doing so, we're storing the entire canvas now inside the canvas variable. And we're going to then, using that canvas variable, var_c gets the canvas dot get context. The get context method sets the 2D drawing context of the canvas and stores it in C. I like to tell my students C is like the paintbrush with which they do all of their painting, all of their drawing on the canvas. So we use C a lot. Okay, we've got this thing set up. One other thing I like to do is set up two more global variables. We're going to set up the width sorry, back up here. I want to go ahead and take the canvas that I've just created, this canvas variable, and set its width to the window's inner width, and the canvas's height to the window's inner height. And what that does is it forces the canvas to take it on the same size as the window. Alrighty, and so we've got our global variables handling our canvas are all set up. That's going to be great. What do I want to do next? As you saw in the sample, what I've got happening in this animation is just a small little square, 10 by 10 pixels, moving around the screen. And so in order to do that, we're going to need to create a function that I'm going to call it draw square, that we'll be able to use over and over again to draw the square. Makes sense. Okay, line these up properly. Inside the draw square function, I'm going to simply use my basic JavaScript drawing methods, again using the C variable that I created above, and I want to set the fill style. We'll do something like red just to start out with, and we're going to simply call fill rect, and we know that the fill rect requires a width, an X, so we'll say 100, and a Y, and a width, and a height, and that's how we use fill rect. And then we simply close path. Now this is really the easiest way to simply draw a rectangle. And if I were then to come out here outside my draw square and just call draw square, we know that then if I save this and view it in my browser, we simply get a little red 10 by 10 square drawn at 100 over 100 down. Okay, that's a pretty static drawing so far. It's not moving, has no potential to move, and so we need to do a few more things. First of all, we need to take our draw square function here, and we need to add some parameters or arguments to it, so that we can change the position and all of the square from outside the draw square function. And so I'm going to, I want 4 arguments here: the X, the Y, the side, and the color. And so where I have red as the color, I'm going to use my argument color instead. Where I have an X and a Y, I'm going to replace the X and the Y here. And where I have the 10 and 10 for the width and height sides, I'm just going to use my side variable. Okay. And now if I were to call the same thing, I'd have to provide, if I provided those exact, well, how about slightly different variables, just so we can prove that it's moving somewhere. We'll just add those same bits of information here to the draw square function and go back to our browser window and refresh. And it actually refreshed live because that's what brackets does. And so now the square is over 200 pixels and down 200 pixels. And if I were to change the color here and save it and go back, we'd say, oh yeah, it's blue, right? So whatever arguments I give it here is going to update it when it's passed in. Okay. If that's all new to you, you may need to watch one of my other videos to learn a little bit more about functions and things like that. But let's move forward. So we have a draw square. We've tested it. It works. But now we need to get it to move. It's just sitting there. And so how are we going to do that? In comes the game engine. We need a game engine. Okay. And so let me take a look at some notes I have here. The game engine, the way I do it, now this is really simplified. Okay. So don't write comments on my video and say, oh, that's not the right way to do it. This is really simplified. I know there's other more sophisticated ways to do this, but this is for entry-level beginner, and it allows beginners to understand better how it works. So we're going to have 3 functions in our game engine: init, draw, and update. The init function is where we're going to initialize the game variables. Init is only called once at the beginning of the game. Then init we'll call draw. And draw is where we draw everything on the canvas. So makes sense. And also it's importantly where we redraw things on the canvas, draw and redraw. And you'll see how that works in a minute. Thirdly, the update function. This is where we update the position of all our drawn objects so that they can appear to move. And really all our game logic will go in here. And again, you'll understand what I mean in a bit. So we need these three functions. So we're going to go back to our file here, and right after our draw square function, let's go ahead and add those three functions. init, draw, and last but not least, update. Okay, and there you go. We've got our game engine skeleton all laid out. Now, what I said earlier is that the init function is the first function to be called, and it is only called once. And so what we need to do to get our game to launch when we first open this file and load it into the browser is we need to call init. So what I like to do is go down here at the very bottom of all my script tags, or all my script code, I like to go ahead and call init. So we're going to call init simply by doing that, and that gets the ball rolling. So let's go up to init. What are we going to do in that particular thing? What we're going to do is initialize the location of the square and then call the draw function. So in order to initialize the location of the square, we need a couple of global variables for the square. So let's go back up here to where all my variables were at the top. How about right about here? And let's create a variable. Let's call it x position. That's the location of the square on the x-axis. And let's just give it the value, initial value of 0. Okay. And let's create another variable called y position and give it the value of 0. Now again, I'm using var to declare all my variables. Any of you who have more experience with JavaScript might be thinking, why doesn't she use let, things like that. But I'm keeping it simple. Okay. So we're just going to use var for now, and it works. Okay. So I've got my x and y variables for the position of the square, and then I also want to create two variables called x speed and y speed. I'm going to give them an initial value of 5. That should be fast enough. Those are our velocity variables. Okay, so I'm putting these in the global scope. That means they're here outside of any other function so that they can be available to all of my functions throughout the game. And I know some people don't think you should use globals, but again, we're keeping it simple. Okay, so we have these globals and they're going to work great. So initially, I was drawing the square here at 200 pixels x, 200 pixels y. Those are the x and y locations. But what we're going to do here, now that we have these two nifty new variables, we're going to put x position in here, and we're going to put y position right here. Okay, and again, they are set to 0, 0. So if I save that and go back and look at my code now, oh, look at that. The little blue square is 10 by 10 square is now located right up here at the upper left corner of the browser. That's because that corresponds to the 0, 0 location of the upper left corner of the canvas. And so it's done just what we expected. And so, so as we can see, as we go along here and we want to start the square to start moving, we're going to be changing x and y position as we go along. Let's go back up here. I want to create two more global variables. I want to say var w. I want to store in this variable the canvas width, which I set earlier to the Windows width, and I'm going to create another variable h and set that to the canvas height. Okay, why am I doing that? Why don't I just use canvas width, canvas height? Well, I like something nice and short. That's easy to use and remember, and just a little bit shorter. Don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it that way. Okay, now back to init. I don't want the square to be drawn in the upper left corner when I start the game. I want it to be drawn right in the center of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and take my x position, which I just created earlier, and I'm going to set it to the width of the canvas, which is now stored in w, and divide that by 2. That'll give me half the width of the canvas. Take y position and set that to the height of the canvas divided by 2. Combining those two things is going to set the square right now, right in the center of the canvas. So let's save this. After the init sets up the initial variables x, y position, then we want to go ahead and call the draw function from inside init. this will cause this global draw function to be called. And again, the draw function is where we draw everything. So what we should do is take our draw square function, which we have out here, cut that from that location, and bring it down and paste it into our global draw function. Let's save this and go ahead and take it back and take a look. See, all of a sudden now we see that our square is being drawn right here in the center of the screen. And if I should change the width and height of the screen here like this and refresh it, okay, it'll always draw right there in the center. Okay, and so let's bring this back out to where it was. Okay, so now we see that this is working as expected. Okay, init is calling, init is setting the x and y position to the center and calling draw, and in the draw function we're drawing the square. There's a few more things that you need to do inside the draw function in order to get our animation to start working. One of the things is we need to call the next function of our game engine group of functions, and that is to call the update. So right after we draw the square, we're going to call update, and the very last thing you need to do inside your draw function is to call a little function, built-in JavaScript function called request animation frame. And this allows us to get the animation started, and the callback object that we want to put in here is the draw function itself. So you can see we're in the draw function and we're calling the draw function from request animation frame. So this basically is our loop that causes our animation to run. Okay, yeah, semicolon there. And for now, that's all we need in our draw function. So if we look at this now, we might think, gosh, I've added a request animation frame. Maybe I should see an animation. But we come back here, refresh our browser, and nothing's moving. We don't have anything moving. Well, our animation is running, according to this. But the problem is nothing's changing to the location of our square because we haven't done anything inside our update function. As you recall earlier, I said the update function is where we update or change things like the location of the objects that we're drawing. And so let's move down here into our update function and let's add a little bit of code. Let's go ahead and change the x position of the square, doing it this way. X position gets the previous or current value of x position, and we add to it some value. Now, it could add just some hard-coded value, but we want to add this previous velocity variable that we created, x speed. Remember, we set that to 5. So x position gets x position plus x speed. Likewise, y position gets y position plus y speed. Okay, and the reason we need to use x and y speed instead of using just some hard-coded values will become apparent a little bit later. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and look at our browser. I probably need to refresh this so you can see it from the beginning. So all of a sudden, my goodness, we have something moving. Okay, now it's not quite what we wanted or expected possibly, but sure enough, we've got animation. And so every frame, every refresh of the browser, we're getting the movement of the square. Looks like that. Alrighty. So how do we get rid of that line of squares being drawn across the screen? What we need to do is come back here to our global draw function, and right at the very top of that, we need to simply go c dot clear rect. And clear rect, again, another built-in JavaScript drawing function, simply draws or clears the rectangle. However, it does require 4 arguments, and those arguments would be x, y, width, and height of the area we want to clear. And so in this case, we want to clear from the upper left corner of the canvas, which is found at 0, 0, and then the width, which is the width of our canvas, and the height of our canvas. So if we place that in there now, the entire rectangle, no matter how big, or excuse me, the entire canvas, no matter how big, is now going to be cleared every time we call draw. And again, draw is happening inside this loop, which is happening 60 times a second. Let's take a look. If we look at this now, that's what we want. Okay, so essentially, we're just drawing, moving the square, and then clearing the rectangle, the whole screen, and then drawing it again, moving it, etc. And that process is happening really, really fast. Okay, hey, so we're getting somewhere. What we want to do next now is we really want to get that square to not just run right off the side of the screen, but we wanted to get to start to bounce right off of the sides of the screen. That's kind of what we had going in our sample. So again, that has to do with the logic or the updating of the location of things, and so that's going to happen inside update. And so what we're going to do first here, let me add a little comment. We want to bounce off the bottom first, okay, since that's the direction we're initially going in. And the bottom of the screen, in order to bounce off that, we're going to have to use an if statement and say something like this. If the x position, right, of our little square is greater than, okay, oh sorry, not x, back up, y. We want to deal with the y-axis here because we're dealing with the bottom of the screen. So we're dealing with the up and down location of the square. So let's start with y position. If the y position of our square is greater than the height of our entire canvas, what do we want to have happen? Really simply, what we want to do is we want to take that y speed variable, which is controlling the velocity or movement of the square on the y-axis, up and down axes. We want to take that y speed and we want to simply reverse it. Y speed gets negative y speed. And if we do that, let's save it real quick, come in here. Oh, sure enough, it worked. F5 to refresh. We go ahead down and sure enough, it bounces right off the bottom of the screen. Now, it doesn't bounce off the right or the top or any other screen because we haven't done that yet. So obviously, we need to add a few more if statements. I like to go ahead and add an else if here. We'll deal with, I put my y's together, my y-axis if statements together, and my x-axis if statements. So we're going to go ahead and do the top of the screen. So else if the y position is less than 0, which represents the top, then we're going to also do y speed gets negative y speed. And again, I'll start another if statement here, and this would be checking, these first two are checking off the bottom and top, and this next set of if statements, this next if statement is going to bounce off right and left, okay? And so, and I can talk a bit more about the if statements and why I'm doing them this way, but let's just go ahead and put this together. If we're dealing with the right and left, we're dealing with the x-axis, so we're going to use the x position of the square, and if that is greater than the width of the screen, which is off to the right, then we want to go ahead and change the x speed. X speed gets negative x speed. In other words, negating the x speed. So if the x speed is currently a negative number and you negate it again, it will become positive. And so again, that's why we're using this x speed variable, not some hard-coded number, because what we want to do is just simply be able to negate it through this method. And take this and shift tab, it'll go back over there where we want it. And let's add an else if clause here, again, checking the x position. If it's less than 0, if that's true, it's to the far left of the screen. And if so, then we want to take the x speed and set it to negative x speed. Okay, let's see if I've done this correctly and haven't made any errors. I often make errors. Maybe you've seen one of my errors. Let's see here. So we've refreshed it, and look at that. We're bouncing off bottom, right, top, bottom, left, top. Awesome. It works. Alrighty. And there we go. Now, I can do some fine tuning here. If you look really carefully, it's hard to do, you can see that the square actually at the bottom and the right actually goes a little bit past the edge and then comes back. And that's because the orientation or the origin of the square is its upper left corner. And so if I wanted to do this properly, at the bottom and the right only do I have to do this. I want to say like the y position plus 10, which happens to be the width or the height of my square. If that is greater than the height, so in other words, the bottom of the square is greater than the height, then reverse. And also here on the right, if x position plus 10 is greater than the height, that would be the right side of the square is greater than the width, then reverse. It's a very, very slight difference. Really can hardly visually see the difference, but there is a difference. Okay. and I'm a perfectionist. I just got to do it. Okay, so that looks really good. I'm loving it. It's working great. Okay, one last thing we can do is to finish this out. We're almost at a half an hour here. Is I want to be able to count bounces. You saw that in my initial one, right? Every time it hits one of the sides, I get a variable bounces. It goes up by 1. So let's go ahead and right here, let's go ahead and create a variable. This is near the top where all my variables are. Call it bounces. Give it a value of 0 when we start. Okay, and then what we want to do, quite simply, is every time we hit one of the sides, which is one of these 4 times that might happen, we want to just say bounces plus plus. Okay, and that all it does is make bounces there go up by 1, and I'm just copying and pasting that in there 3 times. And now we tested this right now. Of course, we're not going to see anything on the screen, but if I did come in here and do a console.log and logged out my bounces variable, then I could do this and save this and go over here and press F12 in the browser so I could see my console up here. And looks like, oh my goodness, I'm getting some numbers going on there. Let's refresh this so I can see. It showed 0 a whole bunch of times, but then now every time I hit an edge, right, it's going up by 1 down here. You can barely see it, but I think I can make this bigger here. And F5 again. There you go. So the number right here, every time I bounce, this is going up by 1. And sure is working. Okay, so that variable bounces is going up. So what we want to do next is instead of just logging it to the console, because that's boring, let's comment that out. We want to actually print it on the screen. So again, we do all our drawing in the draw here. So we're going to add that. Now we want to add anything we want to draw, we want to add before we call update, before we call request animation frame. So let's go in here and we'll just say draw bounces to the screen. So what we simply do is go c.font. Probably should set the font to like 24 pixels, Arial, something. You got to set that, and otherwise it's really tiny and small. You can't see it. And then say c.fill text. Fill text. And in there, that's a function. So we're going to go ahead and do something like bounces :space, and then add to that little label our variable bounces. Then the next 2 arguments are the width and the height. So let's just put it right in the center of the screen. Let's go width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. Okay, and again, that's going to draw it right in the center of the screen. If we save that, look at that, it works. Ta-da! We have a working simple animation, counting the bounces, displaying it to the screen, but more importantly, we've learned about this thing called a game engine. Okay, using just plain old vanilla JavaScript. And that game engine, again, consists of 3 functions that are called in order. init first. Init's only called once at the beginning to initialize a couple variables and call draw. Draw is where our game engine loop exists. And because it uses request animation frame as the very last function call there, it recalls draw over and over again and does the drawing and then calls update. And then update simply updates the location of objects in the screen, really just the square, the location of the square. But it also does the game logic of determining if the location of the square has reached one of the 4 sides of the screen, and if so, it reverses that velocity variable and adds 1 to bounce. So that's it. That's how I do my simple animation and a simple game engine. Hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, could you please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification button, and that will keep you updated on any new videos that I might add to this channel. Thanks for being a part. See you soon.